Hi everybody, today I'm working on a 1995 Volkswagen Jetta. This car has an oil leak coming from the oil filter housing. It's got about 170,000 miles and it never leaked oil at all until just recently when it started leaving a few drops here and there. So this car has the 2.0 liter ABA engine. This engine was in the Volkswagen Golf and Volkswagen Jetta for quite a few years. It's recently started marking its territory from this general area underneath the engine. And when I crawl under here to have a look, we can see it's wet on the back side of the oil filter housing. At first I thought I had a bad oil filter, but even when I replaced it, it's still leaking. And so I was able to track it down that the leaking is coming from the oil cooler interchange, which is just above the oil filter. And right here, there's actually a O-ring between this part, and that's what's causing it to leak. So what we're going to do is take off the oil filter, and then we're going to separate this part and replace the O-ring. What this part does, it's actually a heat exchange between the water cooling system and the oil. What this does is if the oil is getting hot, it will pull down the temperature to the same as the engine coolant temperature, which has got a larger cooling capacity. This part just started recently dripping, maybe only a couple of weeks ago, and since then the leak has gotten steadily worse. So once you start noticing it leaking, it's probably a good idea to take care of it as quickly as you can. Alright, so we'll crawl under here and start the replacement work. So we'll loosen up and take the oil filter off. I'll just turn it a few times and let it drain out before I take it off to avoid making a bigger mess. Okay, it looks like it's mostly stopped draining, so we'll go ahead and pull it off. Alright, next is we need to remove this nut right here, which is holding the oil exchange up against the housing. This is a 27mm nut. So I've got a giant socket here. The angles are kind of awkward. The bolt's not on there too tight, it's just snug almost. Okay, the nut's off. Okay, next we're just going to want to pull this down and separate it completely from the rest of the housing. I'm going to go back up on top and inspect things and see how well I can pull it down without putting too much stress on the coolant passages. It's a little bit tight. If you force it, it'll go. It's probably good to have the car heated up a little bit so that the hoses are softer. There it goes. Got it off. Okay, now we can see the O-ring that needs to be replaced. This guy right here. Just going to use a pick tool, kind of force it off. It's kind of dry and brittle from age. Spray some carbon choke cleaner in there. Try to clean it up the best we can. You know, this is apparently a pretty common leak on these cars. They do a pretty good job of holding their oil inside the engine, except for this part right here. And I'll put a link in the description where you can get this O-ring. But if you're in a jam, apparently, if you take an O-ring off of an old oil filter canister, they're basically the same size. So here's an oil filter canister, and yep, it looks like at least the dimensions look to be the same. I'm going to do a little bit of a test here. Instead of buying a new gasket, I'm just going to take the old one off of this old oil filter. I have to say they look pretty close. This one's a tad thicker, but it should crush down pretty good. So let's give it a try. So we slip the seal back into the space here, and then get it back onto the center spline. Make sure everything's lined back up before pushing it up all the way. Now we'll go back underneath and tighten up that nut. And we want to make sure this is good and snug. Okay, I've tightened it by hand, and I'll just make it snug with the socket tool. Okay. And before finishing up, I'll go back on top just to make sure it all looks okay. I don't have any bits of seal sticking out or anything. Now we can go ahead and put the oil filter back on and then start up the car and test for leaks. We'll just clean up under here a little bit so that we can tell the difference between new oil drips and old oil drips. Okay, we'll start the car and test for leaks. Yeah, I don't see any new signs of leakage, so I think we're good. And that was a super easy repair. That only took maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And you know what the best thing is it didn't cost me any money because I just reused the seal from an old oil filter housing. So that's all there is to it. You can fix a pesky oil leak on your Volkswagen Golf or Volkswagen Jetta motor, and it doesn't even cost you anything. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.